up. If these walls I rise up, either way I lose it all. I always got.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Okay, thank you for coming to the screening of A Thousand Cuts, the Hong Kong premiere of this very powerful documentary about press freedom in the Philippines, but also press freedom in general. As we probably know, we will be joined now for a post-screening discussion with the documentary's director, Ramona Diaz, and of course, the documentary's protagonist, Maria Ressa. I think Maria and Ramona, they are already online. Maria, Ramona, can you hear us?
Yes, we can. I can. Okay. I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you see us though? Can you see me actually?
Yes.
From over there. Okay, we are fixing the screen. Okay. Okay, yes, we can see Ramona and Maria. Okay, please, yes, give it a round of applause for Maria and Ramona.
Oh my God, I did that. Okay.
Okay, thank you for joining us, and thank you for this very powerful documentary that we've just seen at the Hong Kong Asian Film Festival. So actually, before we open it to the floor, maybe I'll just hog the mic a little bit, and then maybe I'll ask a few questions first. Maybe I'll start with Ramona. Can you tell us a little bit about how you actually got in touch with Maria, and actually why did you decide to do this documentary?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having us. I guess it completely skipped my understanding that this was going to be live in front of in front of an audience, which is so great because we haven't had a live audience in so long. So this is so fantastic. Thank you for coming to the screening. Why? Okay. I was really drawn to the Philippines to make a film about President Duterte, right, in the Philippines when he became president in 2016. So the initial story that drew me back to the country was the drug war. I wanted to make a film about the drug war. But when I got to the Philippines in 2017, I realized that, and he became president in 2016, right, that a lot of people had already been were on the ground doing the drug war already. So it was hard to navigate that kind of breaking news kind of thing, because that's not what I do. And so I started just expanding my view and trying to look around to see what else, because I knew I wanted to make a film about President Duterte, or the Philippines under President Duterte. And of course, there was Maria and Rappler, and because they were questioning the drug war, they were questioning the numbers, they were questioning impunity. And Maria was also talking about disinformation. They were writing about disinformation and how all that intersected. So that's what drew me then to the story. So that became the story eventually. And but little did I know that then Maria would become breaking news, right? Because then she became the target of the government and started getting arrested twice and detained once, and then she had to go to court. And by then she had said yes, given us access to film her, and we were there. So I still ended up with breaking news, but in a way that was more, because we were on the ground sooner, we were, as they say, in the room earlier, it was much easier to navigate. So that's what drew me. That was the genesis of the film.
Maria, how did Ramona actually convince you in getting involved in this documentary? I think I read that actually in 2004, she actually rejected an interview request from you about her film. So did you actually think about saying no, just out of revenge, or no?
So that's a great question. So first of all, it was her film Imelda in 2004, and I was CNN at that point, and she did turn me down because well, she can tell you more about it, but the reason I said yes is because you're living through something very similar, right? It's because I don't know what's going to happen, and it is always good to document when times are uncertain, right? It's different when it's Rappler doing it. Number one, we didn't really have the resources. We're a very small news group. You saw how young our team is. We have about 100 people. Our median age is 23 years old. So I'm really an outlier, i.e. I'm old. But the other reason is because look at Ramona. It is 3:40 in the morning in Maryland, which is where she is. And it's 4:30 our time, or 4:40 our time. But I think the second part is, she's extremely hardworking, there all the time. And then the third part is Filipino American. I'm a Filipino American, and it's a perspective that I never really thought about because I never get to talk to anyone who is in the same space. When I am in the Philippines, Rappler is a Filipino organization, and so the American side of me stays very quiet. But inevitably, when I'm with Filipinos, I feel American, and when I'm with Americans, I feel Filipino. So I thought, we bridge cultures, and yet we care about the same thing. So those are the three reasons, really, and I'm really glad we did.
Can I really say that, of course, this is a film about press freedom in the Philippines, but it's also about press freedom in general. So it's not exactly just very specific to a country, but it also has a universalist theme to it. So is it your intention, Ramona, to actually use the things that you see in the Philippines as also a showcase about the importance of press freedom in the time and age that we're living in?
Yeah, most definitely. I'm not sure if it was conscious on my part, but there was something about, when I pivoted to filming Maria's story and Rappler's story, I knew that it was very specifically Filipino because it was Duterte and press freedom. It is a Filipino story. But on the other hand, it's also a very global struggle because of the themes of press freedom. So, and disinformation, right? Because that's also, it's covered in the film as well. So I think when it became very apparent to me that it is more a global story, it opened up a lot of things because it can be very specific, but then it sort of transcends the specificity simply because it's about press freedom and disinformation. So I guess to answer your question, yes. It's easier then to open up the narrative and navigate that kind of those themes.
The battle is global, and it is, Hong Kong knows this battle as well as we do in the Philippines. On September 22, disinformation networks, influence operations out of China and out of Philippines linked to the police and military here were taken down by Facebook. Right. And I think part of the reason this is an existential moment for not journalists alone, but democracy is because of technology. Right. And so we have, if anything, what Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, what they've proven to us is that the differences in culture are not as, what's more important than differences in culture is what humanity has in common. Because we are all on the same social media platforms, but those platforms have to have guardrails to protect us, journalists, activists, users. Well, you would call them users, but people, right? And then the other part is power wants power. And journalists are trained to try to hold power to account. This is one of those moments where we don't know what will happen next. It's really creative destruction. And, I will say again, I think the Philippines and Hong Kong are facing similar battles. And it's up to us, and it's tough. It demands great sacrifices from all of us. But it all depends on what we want for the future. And I guess that's the third part. It makes us think, is democracy really important? What are you willing to sacrifice for it? Or maybe you should just let it go, right? These are questions. It's existential.
But Maria, actually, well, from what we see in the film and from what I read also, that, well, you and your colleagues at Rappler have made great sacrifices for your work. For example, am I correct that actually you have to brought in mental health counselors for your colleagues so as to keep them with the peace of mind while they're at work? So how challenging is it? I mean, when you're working on the ground in the Philippines at this point in time?
In fact, it's very challenging. So right before this, it is still ongoing right now. Journalists, news heads, and reporters are doing a meeting to try to figure out, what can we do? How can we protect ourselves? And I think in Rappler, what you saw in the film is, this began for us in 2016. And we've learned to cope with it. And we've increased not just the dealing with it mentally, because this is death by 1,000 cuts, right? It is meant to pound you to silence. It's meant to make you succumb, to surrender. But beyond that also is that we feel like the physical security. So when you have so much hate and violence, it moves from the online world to the real world. And that's another part that scares me, because we have such a young team. So we've increased security 6 times during the filming. In the time that Ramona was chasing us, of course, one of her first days of filming was when I was arrested on February 13th last year, and or a little bit more, I guess.
Yeah, last year.
And she went into the detention. I mean, she went in. So that was one of the first days of filming.
Yeah. My crew hadn't arrived yet. So I sort of fought my way in, and I told them I was with Rappler. So they let me in the room where Maria was at. And because my crew hadn't come in yet, I just filmed with my iPhone. I just whipped out my iPhone and started filming, because you have to, right? So you use what you have.
Okay. I actually have a lot of questions to ask, but I think it's better if we can actually open it up to the floor to see what the audience have to say about the documentary. And I'm sure they have a lot of questions to ask Ramona in Maryland and Maria in the Philippines. If you do have any questions, please raise your hand, and my colleague will pass you a microphone. So the gentleman over there.
Thanks, Maria and Ramona, bringing us the latest happenings in the Philippines, which is like only 150 miles away from Hong Kong. We're sitting really close together. But I've got like 2 questions. To the context, the drug wars, how's the church, how's the religious people in the Philippines thinking? Do they prefer killing every single drug dealers or using education? Or that's the first question. For the second question, in terms of protecting the fourth estate, no matter in Hong Kong, in the Philippines. In Hong Kong, we're suffering quite a lot in the last 18 months, apart from the COVID. What would you suggest as a normal citizen? What shall we do in terms of the protection of the fourth estate or the press freedom? Thank you.
I think that's a question for you.
Sure.
About the fourth estate, that's you.
Okay. Would you like me to answer or we take it? I can respond to it. So thank you so much for your question. It is so nice to see you in the theater, and I
know, I'm so jealous.
I wish we could be there, right? So I think the first question is, we still live in an environment that is dominated by violence and fear. This is what is it now? So this is our 34th week in lockdown. It's still a modified lockdown in Manila. So unlike Hong Kong, where you have come out again, we are just starting to come out. But our lockdown has been dominated by arrests and violence. All right, more than 100,000 people have been arrested for quarantine violations, and we've had killings that have happened. The drug war killings have continued. So there's that real world violence, and then there's the fear. There are people who have been arrested for what they posted on social media. An anti-terror law, much like your security law, was passed while we were in lockdown. And this anti-terror law would allow a small group of cabinet secretaries to name anyone a terrorist, somebody like me, for example, and then arrest us without a warrant and hold us for up to 24 days. There are more than 35 petitions at the Supreme Court today. I hope our Supreme Court takes this into oral argument soon, challenging the constitutionality of this law. So that's the first is, I think Filipinos are grappling with this. It's a dual virus, right? This virus of lies and then a true health virus. And that affects journalism because while the pandemic was happening, our largest broadcaster, ABS-CBN, which is a network, the news group I used to head, was shut down. So, little Rappler continues to fight. It's our 4th year of fighting this. But the largest broadcaster, this is huge, right? So definitely chilling effect. Forget chilling. We're in Siberia. And the second thing is, I think journalists are trying to cope with how to handle this and still do our job. So we keep doing our jobs. That's what we're trying to do in Rappler is, they're hanging a Damocles sword over your head to try to intimidate you. You push it away and you pretend it's not there and you keep doing your jobs. What should citizens do? And, we have the utmost admiration for what we have seen in Hong Kong, the kinds of protests that were there, when people stood up, but the dangers have increased. So I think this is one of those moments where journalism, activism, human rights activists are under attack in the Philippines. This is one of those moments where we have to take it beyond the fourth estate, that every citizen in a democracy has to ask themselves, what are you willing to sacrifice? Because if you don't, you will lose it, right? And that's at least the way I feel, right? I mean, your condition is very different and it's a tougher one in some ways, but you had so much courage that we were watching you with admiration. Now, look, even the United States was right on the edge. They were on the brink. And just this late last night, so early morning, our time, there seems to be a return back to evidence-based reasoning. The Democrats mobilized the vote. So I don't know what our equivalent of that will be, because if the strongest or if the supposed beacon of democracy goes through this much to be able to regain a sense of evidence-based reasoning, a sense of power back to the people, what will our countries, what will Hong Kong, what will we have to do to get there? I'm sorry, I have no answers. Maybe Ramona can.
No, but it's very interesting, that these elections have shown that it was good old activism, good old grassroots organizing of civil societies that brought out the vote. It was actually going on the ground in spite of the pandemic, right? In spite of COVID. It's good old going to and knocking on doors and text banking and phone banking to the max, like 24/7. We're all at home. So what can you do to help it, right? Everyone was phone banking, everyone was text banking, but you had to get the vote out. How do you get the vote out? Good old organizing on the ground, grassroots, small groups, especially a lot of groups of people of color and women came out, got together and said, what do we do? Because not only are you're fighting disinformation, right? You're fighting voter suppression, gerrymandering, where they've been the districting of redistricting zones. You're fighting all that, so you really have to get together as a collective to come together. It's a very inspiring story, actually. It made me really believe again in grassroots organizing. When I had lost, I don't know, I'd lost the fervor for it. Now I'm like, yes, because it worked. It worked. It worked this time. It worked because we were, when you get desperate, right? You go back to what you know and what you can really do yourself, like personally. There's a lot of personal reckoning, I think, for people here, and personal responsibility. What can you do as a citizen? And evidently we could do a lot. So it's a very inspiring time right now in the U.S.
I think so. I mean, the election of Joe Biden actually proved that, well, we could actually combat disinformation. Grassroots activism could actually do something, but we can still see that Donald Trump got 48%. And from the documentary, we can also still see people like Bato de la Rosa and Mocha Usong, actually these celebrity politicians, they could actually still mobilize the masses through the perpetuation of lies or disinformation. So actually, what can journalists do in a situation like this?
Hold the line. I mean, you saw that in the film, right? We really have to. So I think globally, journalists have done our jobs, but the biggest game changer is technology. What I don't think we realize, and I've gone much further than that film in terms of saying that social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook in the Philippines, right? That these are now behavior modification systems, and that they are taking all of our data and essentially creating a market for behavior modification. And we have to fight that. So one of the things we need to do is demand guardrails be put in place, that this insidious manipulation be made transparent, and that we, because the biggest question there is, how can people have free will if we are being constantly manipulated? And it's not just governments that do it, right? Because what drives this is the money. So everything comes down to money and power. So I think the first one is journalists continue doing their jobs, survive this time of the coronavirus, which is very tough for news groups, for independent news groups. But the main thing that needs to happen is we need to take technology and give us back our freedoms, our agencies, our data. And that's tough to say in China, because essentially what Facebook has done, China has done. And as China gains greater power in the Philippines, they cut 2 years ago, the Chinese government and the Philippine government cut a deal for video surveillance of our people. So these are the things that we have to do. This new technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, 24/7 surveillance. How do we as people get our rights back? And then how can we demand accountability?
Okay.
But in the U.S., they also use. I mean, if you can, it's neutral, right? Technology is neutral, right? So they also, in the end, realize, okay, if you're using it in the beginning, it was for good, and then they used it for bad. But then they, something like the Lincoln Project, right? So regain that space and fact check every time something came out from like the president's mouth. They fact check and like really immediately had a response, right? It was an immediate response to anything he said or anything the administration said that was wrong. But that of course, that took a lot of resources, something like that. But then they said, okay, this is a game you're playing. We're going to play it, and we're going to fact check you at every turn. And that proved very effective. It really caught people's attention. So you can turn it on its head too and use it, but it takes so much effort and a lot of resources to do it. And we shouldn't have to. The thing is, we shouldn't have to I mean, lies are lies, right? We shouldn't have to constantly respond in that manner.
Okay, so we'll see whether we have another question for a friend in the audience.
Thank you very much, Maria. As a journalist in Hong Kong, I have a lot of admirations for you, and thank you, Ramona, for documenting this film, which allow us to draw inspiration and courage from Maria. So my heartfelt thank you, and you and all your colleagues in Rappler are in my prayers. I hope you're all well and safe. I have a questions about how we can learn from you in Hong Kong. You have mentioned a lot about how social media shaped the country. And in Hong Kong, we are still on the course of understanding the game of social media and how it affects the public opinions. So as a journalist, how we can win the game in social media. And also another very timely questions, as Maria, you have just mentioned you are Filipino Americans. So, and you in the film, you have related Trump with Duterte as well. So what do you feel about the elections and all the drama in the US? Especially when this happened, it was supposed to be the biggest democracy in the world. And most importantly, when regions like Hong Kong, we are still aspiring for a democracy country. What can we learn from that? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. And, you know, it is a challenging time to be a journalist. And for the longest time, for months, we were watching you in Hong Kong because I was saying, oh my gosh, why aren't Filipinos doing what the Hong Kong, what you were doing, right? I think, let me answer the three parts. So the first is there's a great book by Shoshana Zuboff. She's Harvard emeritus, a professor emeritus at Harvard. She wrote a book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And she takes all of the ills that we're talking about, privacy, disinformation, conspiracy theories, hate speech, all of these things, and she brings it down to the business model, right? And why? Because each of us puts in our data, our posts, whether it's on any social media platform, we put it in, but we only see the first text. That's the content. But what we don't see is the second text, which is the one that is more powerful. That second text is the data that connects us to our network. So there's network data. That second text takes machine learning and takes everything we put inside the platform and takes the surplus of the data and then develops a model of us, of each of us, and takes our most vulnerable moment to a message. And artificial intelligence will take that and sell it, whether it is to a company, that's the new 21st century advertising, which is actually changing our behavior, or to a country, propaganda on steroids, right? Facebook and Twitter have both taken down disinformation networks that have been attacking Hong Kong, coming from China, you know this. So that's the first, is we need to understand the technology. And now I am actively working for legislation, and that's a tough one to say, because I 2 years ago when Ramona was filming us, I grew into this, right? The second thing you asked, you know, elections and all the drama in the US, I watched the social media platforms throw everything to try to contain disinformation, and they almost failed. And that is in the United States, their home country. So what do you think is going to happen to us when it's our elections, right? Myanmar has an election today. Myanmar has already lived through genocide. And the UN has sent a special team there. They've seen that. Facebook has sent its own team. They know the killings happened enabled by the platform, and yet there's no accountability. This is my greatest, I guess it's not so much anger as my frustration. I feel like we fought in 2016. In the film you saw, we were fighting impunity of the drug war, of President Duterte, and the impunity of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, right? The attacks I've had to live through, and they've gotten worse, especially after I got convicted on June 15th are dehumanizing. And the last time, I had a German friend who pointed out that the kinds of attacks I get on social media were very similar to how Germany attacked the Jews. It makes you other, it makes it okay to attack you. So it makes it okay to have violence. It is dehumanizing. And then I think the third part of Hong Kong, oh, wow. We both have a new law to deal with that is far more draconian than anything that we have had. We do every story we can on the arrests that are happening. I wish you to stay safe, and I think that the way we're going to do this is by shining the light. It's tough. I don't really know what the right way forward is, and the risks have increased because of these laws. But what do journalists do? We tell the stories. So we keep telling the stories, hoping that we will spark our citizens. And then finally, in the end, that's what it'll come down to, right? Every citizen in Hong Kong is going to choose. If you stay quiet, silence is complicity. I say this here in the Philippines. If we don't call out constitutional infringements, then we allow it to continue. So the risks are high, but what we stand to lose is everything. And I guess that's what it's part of the reason that we have to stand up for what we believe is right. But we're watching closely, and thank you for watching us closely. And the only thing we can do is to try to work together to help each other.
Ramona, may I ask, actually, the documentary has been shown around the world, and especially also in the US since Sundance earlier this year. So what was the response like from the audiences that you met?
So we premiered at Sundance, and Maria and the Rappler team are actually there, which was, it seems like so long ago, but that was the premiere earlier this year. And I think it really hit home in the US. It was very personal to a lot of people because they recognized their own situation in the film. I knew that was going to happen. I had no idea to what extent, but a lot of people then approached me in the audience, and throughout, we had like 4 screenings throughout the festival, that it was so familiar to them, and they were shocked because Americans are shocked that it's happening here, and we found that to be true as well as we roll out the film in the US. Like we're still in virtual cinema because of the pandemic. And the audiences have not stopped. Like especially journalism, journalism schools buy screenings by the blocks, and I think it's just resonating. We're going back to that global story, but when you make these films, you never know if it's going to do that. You never know when it's going to be released. You never know what the world will be like. But I think because also people are home. People are watching this usually at home virtually. And sometimes like this, there's more time to think about it. There's really more time to reflect on your own situation. Yeah, so I think it's really, there's something about it. It's a very timely story, and also timeless because it deals with all the timeless themes like, authoritarianism, speaking truth to power, David and Goliath, all that. Those are classic themes.
Yes, I think the audience actually, the film means so much to us, and I see that, the audience, they do have a lot of more questions to ask, but if only we have the time. Okay, but but thank you very much, Maria. Thank you, Ramona, for joining us from Manila and also from Maryland at 4:30 a.m., 5 a.m., is it, yes. Ramona? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Maria, Ramona.
Thank you
for being with us, the audience, for the screening of 1,000 Cuts. Okay, bye-bye, Maria. Bye-bye, Ramona.
Bye-bye.